An American man in custody in the Bahamas after his wife mysteriously went overboard on the water. Her daughter now raising red flag allegations.
He made threats in the past, so I'm just trying to make sure that his anger didn't overtake him and he's done something that he can't undo.
Only Brian Hooker knows the truth. Was it a tragic and unpredictable accident? Or could this be something far more sinister? This is Scandal, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Sierra Gillespie. And let's bring on today's expert guest to talk them through. It's maritime lawyer Michael Winkleman. Thank you so much for coming on with us today. And let's start with this newest info, the fact that Brian was arrested, but he hasn't been charged. Can you explain this part to me?
Well, I mean, it's still early on in the process, but clearly the fact that he was arrested is really a clear sign that there was enough evidence there of probable cause to charge him. In terms of the process going forward, I think it's going to be a long process. For me, the big question is whether or not this is going to proceed in America or whether or not it's going to be in the Bahamas. There is an extradition treaty between Bahamas and the United States, so I would be surprised if this ultimately wasn't something, assuming there's enough evidence to go forward, which certainly sounds like there is. I would think it's a case that proceeds, a criminal case that proceeds in the United States.
Okay, so I have so many questions about this because if he's going to be accused of a crime, which again, he has yet to be charged, but if there was an alleged crime that happened on a boat in the water, it's not, in the Bahamas specifically or in America, how does that work? Is there international waters that play into all this?
Of course. Well, but I don't think they were in international waters. There's always a perimeter around every body of land in the United States, Bahamas, that's still considered the territory. You've got sometimes 3 miles, sometimes 12 miles off the U.S. That's still considered like you're in America. It's the same with the Bahamas. It doesn't sound like they were particularly far off the coast, if at all. They may have been going in between two islands. So here, because it occurred in the Bahamas, certainly the Bahamas has jurisdiction, and because it involved a U.S. citizen, U.S. also has jurisdiction. So you've definitely got competing jurisdictions in play, and being a maritime attorney, that's what I deal with all the time. I don't do criminal law per se. Of course, that's, prosecuting jurisdictions that do that. I don't do criminal defense. I do maritime law, which generally involves people getting injured or killed on the high seas.
Okay, you brought up so many good points there. The fact that when I hear waters, I just think, okay, any water is international water. That's just the way it is. I had no idea about this range outside of every country. That was great, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers didn't know that either. So it happened technically in the Bahamas, but based on what you're saying, the fact that we have a victim who is an American, that means it could be, pursued criminally in America. So how does that get decided? Could it happen both in the Bahamas and America? I mean, could he be charged in both places?
Yes, strictly speaking, you could, but usually the case is brought in either one of the two. It would really, I'm certain the family is going to be requesting that this be handled in the United States. They don't have the authority to do that. It would only be District Court of Miami, federal prosecutors in Miami, or someone maybe from their home state of Michigan. But so it would have to be some prosecuting body that would be the ones who requested the extradition. But there is a treaty between the United States and Bahamas for them to extradite people from the Bahamas to the United States. It happens relatively frequently. But yeah, I think that's why people are generally fascinated by things that happen on the sea, not only because it happened at sea, but because there's a lot of unique laws that apply to it. You'll often see this in the cruise ship context where someone is killed or someone goes missing or someone goes overboard, and you could have a multitude of different jurisdictions in play. The United States, where the incident occurred, the flag of the vessel, the port that it was in. So that's really what I think makes cases like this very unique.
Oh, it's just one thing after another. Everything you just listed there is a lot of things that investigators are really going to have to pay close attention to. And I guess the other huge part of this is, again, he's been arrested, is in custody, but hasn't been charged. So could you hypothesize what sort of charges he might face?
Well, so I think the reason why he was arrested and not necessarily charged is, my guess is because they were concerned about him leaving the Bahamas, so he would be considered a flight risk. So you can arrest someone, you can hold them for a period of time, usually it's 24 hours, and then that gives them a period of time to keep in the Bahamas to see what other evidence there is, if any. If he's going to be charged, I mean, it's most likely going to be murder, would be my guess.
Well, it's hard though, because he says she went overboard. The current was really strong. You know, I tried to help her, but the last I saw of her, she was being taken away by a really strong current. And it's tricky because accidents do happen. Unfortunately, we've seen that. However, we have Lynette's daughter who's saying, I don't know, their relationship was kind of strange. There might be something off here. But Brian is the sole witness. How important is it what he says? But he still has the rights in the Bahamas not to speak to investigators, rights to an attorney, I mean.
Well, I think that's an important point, and I think due process is such an incredible thing and an important thing, whether anywhere in the world that someone has a right to a fair trial, not to be, proven guilty until otherwise it's actually been brought against them. And look, I think the way the world works nowadays is 99% of people have already said, well, Brian did it clearly because he's been arrested for it. I don't know that that's the case. Obviously, I'm not involved. I wasn't there at the time, but I do think it's important that he's given the right to due process. Having said that, clearly there was enough evidence that was out there for them to arrest him. They had to have probable cause to do that. And yeah, I think there's a lot of indicia out there that something bad happened. It's really binary. Either it was an accident or there was a crime that was committed. It has to be one of the two. I think the problem is a lot of the information that Brian has put out there is not necessarily holding water.
Okay, so you said there has to be enough evidence for this probable cause to arrest him. What sort of evidence could that be? Because so far in any of the publications I've seen, they haven't said, we have, sometimes we have ring camera video, which obviously would likely not be the case here, or we have DNA or whatever. What sort of evidence would you surmise that they might have?
Well, I think a lot of it likely was from the daughter, and the daughter giving what sounds like very detailed anecdotes about them having problems in the past, possibly related to domestic violence, that they maybe were both drinkers, and that when there was drinking involved, there could be issues in that situation. I think there's probably just the fact that the story maybe doesn't necessarily add up, that she went over and then he paddles in. I frankly think that the fact that he posted something on what he posted on Facebook, that statement was very cold, very monotone. The fact that he was talking in a way to the family members in a very odd and cold and monotone way, that tells me that likely when the investigators or the police, Bahamian police, were there and interviewing him, something felt off. Generally speaking, at least in America, I'm certainly no expert in Bahamas criminal law, but in America, probable cause is a relatively low standard. It's not as high as, to convict someone is an incredibly high standard beyond a reasonable doubt. To have probable cause, it's really just having a reasonable suspicion. And I certainly, in my opinion, think there's plenty of grounds for suspicion to arrest Brian in this situation.
There are a lot of mysteries with all of this and kind of strange facts that happen too. One of the things is that when Lynette went overboard, I guess she had a lanyard that had the key, to the ignition to the dinghy to actually make it go. That's why he said it took him so long to get to the land, because all of a sudden the dinghy, the motor isn't working because we don't have the key. I've got to paddle all the way back to shore. Can you explain that to me? I haven't been on a boat in, I guess, a year. Last summer I was on the boat. I wasn't driving. I did not have to pay attention to that. Why would she have this lanyard on her person? I don't understand it. Does it make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense. Assuming it's true, it makes perfect sense to me. I of course have a lot of doubt, in my opinion, about the veracity of the story that was told by Brian. But I think the easiest way to analogize it is when people go on jet skis or wave runners, you wear the little wristband that connects to the motor so that if you fall off, the jet ski or wave runner will stop. So I would have to assume it was the same as that.
I see. Okay, so then it would make sense if she had the key on her. It stops, the wave rushes onto the boat, she goes overboard, and then, it would take a while for him to get to the shore. However, if he was this criminal mastermind, and again, these are allegations, it would make sense then that he would want more time to pass between when she went overboard and when he would report her missing. Because I think it was around 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday when he eventually reported her missing. And there was extensive searches, by the way. Now, I know that evidence would be helpful if we were able to recover her. First of all, to find her safe, but at this point, it's been many days. I don't know that that would be very likely. So if we were to recover Lynette's body, what sort of information would investigators want from that?
Well, okay, so look, I think assuming it was a crime, and we're just talking opinions, we don't have any evidence of it. It was either something that was premeditated and Brian planned it and wanted to pull it off, for whatever reasons. And there I would want to look into, well, was there insurance on Lynette? Was there a life insurance policy, and might that have been the motive to do it? Or if it wasn't premeditated, was it something that just happened in the moment? And let's say they were drinking, let's say they got in a fight, and the next thing you know, he pushes her over and she's gone. I mean, those are, I think, the two trails that it could go down. In terms of finding the body, I think that's infinitesimally small at this point. If we were going to find the body, it would likely be because it washed ashore. But generally speaking, with Coast Guard search and rescue missions, first 24 hours are critical. In my experience, when people go overboard, mostly on cruise ships, if they're not found in the first 24 hours, they're not going to be found. There's been some incredible stories that have, of course, been outliers to that. But the more time that goes on, the less likelihood that Lynette's going to be found. And of course, I feel terrible for the family and what they're having to go through in such a terrible situation.
It's so sad. It almost makes you think of Nancy Guthrie in the way where it's like, we don't know what happened, and we don't know if we're ever going to have any sort of a resolution. To your point, the first hours are the most important of all, and she wasn't recovered during that time. So I mean, my heart just goes out for the family going through all of this. And I guess the other thing too is, in the cases that I cover, usually they don't happen on the water. So it's, you know, somebody's home, it could be in a city, there could be ring camera video or neighbors who are nearby. You know, this makes it more secluded, right? I mean, somebody would have come forward and said, yeah, I saw them on the boat, whatever. That we haven't heard anything like that. They were out on the water alone. So if investigators are talking to Brian, let's say that he's like, okay, I don't need an attorney, I'll tell you everything I know, I just want to find Lynette. What sort of information do you think they'd be asking him for?
I think they'd be asking a ton of information. What happened? Why did it happen? Why did you go out at that time? I mean, I think there's a million questions that I know if I was sitting across a desk from him that I would be asking. And yeah, I agree. When things like this happen on the high seas, there's an incredible amount of solitary nature or it's situations where you can get away with a lot more. And I think that's why there is a tremendous amount of crime that happens at sea. I think most people are generally not aware of it, but because of these sort of certain factors, I think it really does give rise to a lot of ability to do bad things.
It's tricky because I work at Law and Crime. I have a show called Scandal. My brain is kind of wired to see kind of the negative things out in life. However, as we talked about at the start, there are accidents. It happens all of the time. And that's what Brian is saying happened. There was some sort of accident here. So if that's the case, how does he prove his case that this was an accident? Because, you know, at the same time, there are no witnesses if he was this criminal mastermind. But also, if he wants to prove his innocence, there are no witnesses to say that she literally fell over because of this big wave. I mean, what do you make of that?
I mean, no doubt, he is the quote-unquote star witness, and his story and his alibi, those are the key things. And really, if he is charged and he does go to trial, it's really going to be a question of a jury and their determination as to whether or not they're believing his story or not. And then outside of that, you would look at whatever extrinsic evidence there was. Of course, a smoking gun would be something like there being blood in the vessel, blood in the boat. If they found the body, if there was indication of there being any kind of a struggle or bruises in any particular location, for sure.
There's a lot ahead. I mean, to your point, if they found the body, that would be a great wealth of evidence, but also we don't know if that's even possible or what's going to happen. Toward the beginning of the interview, you and I talked about, you know, could this be prosecuted in the Bahamas? Would it be in America? What's going to happen? So I guess as we're wrapping up the interview, what are your thoughts or what projections, what you expect to happen in this case?
Well, I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I'm just going to give you my opinion, Sierra. But based on what I've seen and the fact that they arrested him, there had to have been some type of mildly smoking guns out there that showed that there was evidence of wrongdoing here. We'll see what comes out from that. From my view, in my opinion, it looks like his story has a lot of holes in it. And I think if he is charged, I think the family will be bending over backwards to have him brought to the U.S. I would be surprised if U.S. attorneys were not interested in extraditing him here. So I think if that's going to happen, it's going to happen in the U.S. And it's really just going to be a question of what other evidence is out there. To me, I keep pointing to, if there was a life insurance policy on her, that would really be a big motive to do it. To obviously have her killed and then come up with a story that it was an accident, because of course you can't kill someone and then collect insurance. But in this situation, I think there's a lot of red flags that are very troubling. I do think Brian is entitled to due process of law, and I hope and trust that he will get that. But I think the American legal system is terrific. I think the Bahamas does its best with its legal system, and I think ultimately the truth will come out, or whatever is the closest version to the truth that we can get to. And I hope that will bring some level of closure to the family.
Oh yeah, my heart goes out to Lynette's family, her daughter, her, extended family. Her mother has even released a statement too. It's really, really hard to take. It's a difficult situation, and you're right. There are kind of a lot of red flags. This show is called Scandal, after all, but it's an interesting case. Michael Winkleman, thank you for coming on and walking us through it.
Thank you, Sierra. Nice to see you.
This is one of those stories that just keeps on developing. We're going to bring you all the latest details as soon as we have them. Meanwhile, if you have any ideas for a future episode of Scandal, please send them our way. Our tip line is scandal@lawandcrime.com. And if you want to connect with me personally on social media like Instagram, you can find me at Sierra Gillespie. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.